do, can I ask everyone to fill in every spare seat by shuffling to the middle because we're going to fill all the seats. Thank you. Start this one. I'm also a Christian member of the student group who are hosting today's debate on the topic of Your God is Dead. We're delighted that so many people have come today to hear the topic debated, but before we begin, can you just double check that your phones are on silent or switched off? That would be very helpful, thank you. Today's debate is hosted by one of the Christian groups here on campus, ES, which stands for Evangelical Students. This week, as you may have seen on the posters or on the blue jumpers that members are wearing, we're encouraging you to think about the fact that everybody worships a God and to explore who or what your God is. The purpose of today's debate is to further examine this idea, specifically to consider the God of the Bible, Jesus, his resurrection and its implications. This is a friendly debate where the two parties will articulate their views. There will be no decided outcome and no adjudicator to decide a winner. Instead, we challenge you to engage with what's said and to decide with what's true for you. Each speaker will have 3 opportunities to speak, each for 5 minutes. At the 5-minute mark for each speaker, a bell will ring once, and after a further 30 seconds, the bell will ring again continuously until the debater finishes speaking. I will allow each speaker 30 seconds to gather his thoughts before calling him forward to offer his rebuttal. Today, arguing for the affirmative that your God is dead, we welcome Scott Sharrad. Scott is the founder of and current president of the Atheist community of South Australia. He is also the editor of Humanist Pages, the new magazine of the Humanist Society of South Australia. Scott brings with him a passion for ensuring that he holds as many correct beliefs and as few incorrect beliefs as possible. Previously, he has helped found the Free Thought Student Alliance, a coalition of atheist, secular, skeptic, humanist and free-thinking university and school clubs and societies from around Australia. Scott is held in high regard in the atheist and humanist communities of South Australia. He is also a former president of Godless and has debated on the club's behalf in the past. Arguing opposite Scott for the negative is Linn. Geoffrey is the Anglican chaplain at the University of Adelaide and has worked alongside students on this campus in his capacity as a staff worker at ES for more than 10 years. He is also a pastor at Holy Trinity Church, Adelaide. I now invite the first speaker, Scott, to come forward.
Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I was last in a debate with Geoffrey in 2010 on the topic of God is love. Then I was arguing the negative. Today I'm arguing the affirmative, that your God is dead. In 2010 I pointed out just how loaded that question was, and today's question is again a very loaded one. It presumes that there is a God to die. And it's quite ludicrous for an atheist like myself to be arguing that a God has died, that a God has existed in the past and is now dead. But let's break down the question. The word God is a very nebulous term. If you speak to 50 different people, you're going to get 50 different answers as to what God actually is. Some of them are going to be very similar, some are going to be incredibly different, exclusionary different. They're not going to be able to exist in the same universe as each other. So we ask ourselves a question: who is correct? Which one of those beliefs of what God is correct? Can they all be correct, or can they not? It's very unlikely that they're all correct. Can they all be wrong? It's very likely. In Australia, currently, 22.3% of Australians identify as having no religion. Now, this is the fastest growing classification of religious belief or non-belief. It grew from 15.2% in 2001 to 22.3% in 2011. And everywhere you look in the world, every single country, the group of non-religious is on the increase. No matter where you look, it's on the increase everywhere. And you have to ask yourselves why that is. I'll come to it later in the talk. But something else that we're seeing around the world as a result of the increase of the non-religious is an increase in the number of asylum seekers who are atheist. They are fleeing countries with fundamental beliefs where they will kill people who have no religion. They're coming to countries like Australia, like Britain, like the US, like all the countries in Europe, where the percentage of non-religious people is approaching a quarter, if not even larger, of the population. But why are they fleeing those countries? We know they're becoming more fundamental. We have a look in Africa, and we see the increase in homophobic laws with death penalties for gay people. We have a look in the Middle East, and we see the death penalty for simply not believing in a God. For a thought in your head, you can be killed. But why is it increasing? Something I'll come back to again later. If we come back to that increase in non-religious people, why is it increasing? We can determine through studies that the higher your education and the higher level of your prosperity, your religiosity decreases. It's a correlated fact that's come across every single study of every single society, as education and wealth increases, your belief in a religion decreases. So as you study the world around you, as you come to understand it, you no longer have a belief in a God. And why is it, jumping back to the asylum seekers and the increase in fundamentalism around the world, why is that happening? I've got an answer for you. It's the death throes of a philosophy that has reached the end of its usefulness. As an idea starts to disappear, it wants to hang around. It wants to hang on for life, like every one of us. But the result of that is, for this philosophy, is that it becomes extreme fundamentalism and advocates for the death of people that do not agree with it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Scott. I now invite our second speaker forward, Geoffrey.
Well, thank you for coming to this debate, particularly because of the invitation of an ES friend. Here at ES, we think it's just terrific that you put aside time amidst the busyness of study, work and life in general to investigate these important matters. And we hope you enjoy this very friendly debate. Thank you to Scott for sharing some of his thoughts, and in my first speech what I'm going to do is briefly outline my perspective on the topic before I return to Scott's case in my second and third address. Is my God dead? Well, more than anything else today, I want to say I hope that he's alive and well. Now, I realise that might not seem like the strongest opening to say I hope that God is not dead. It sounds a little bit soft. Almost as if I have no evidence, only dreams and desires and wishes that I long to be fulfilled. Don't worry, I will talk about the evidence for God being literally alive in the man Jesus Christ. But I'm starting here because I figure that even if you can accept that God is alive literally, you'll still want to know how God is alive figuratively. That is, you want to know why it matters and how it affects you and what difference God might make in your life. Traditionally, Christians have said that God is real and relevant because he made us, and therefore we're in some way indebted to him. To be fair, I think that logic is actually pretty compelling. If you make even an inanimate object yourself, you know that it's right that you are treated in a particular way as the owner of that thing. But today, instead I'd rather say that I hope that God is not dead, because the world would be even worse off without him. Three reasons why. Firstly, if there is no God, then those who wreak havoc on our world might not ever be held to account for their actions. From greedy entrepreneurs who destroy the environment to dictatorial megalomaniacs who commit genocide, more often than not, they manage to escape punishment. To put it at its most extreme, if God is dead, and all we have is life as we see it, then Adolf Hitler, who exterminated 6 million Jews before shooting himself to avoid facing justice, you'd say he got away with it. If there is no God, then what ISIS, the self-proclaimed Islamic State, is doing in Iraq to Christians and minorities at this very moment will one day only be remembered as a marginal footnote in history, not as an appalling crime against humanity which deserves to be punished. Secondly, if God is dead, it seems to me that we have no greater meaning or higher purpose to our lives. Scientific advance can explain the intricacies of how life is formed, and it can improve our lives wonderfully, but ultimately science is silent on the purpose and meaning of our existence. It offers no meta-narrative for why we are here, other than to say that we are a collection of atoms which have agreed to hang out for 70 or 80 years before they separate again. And thirdly, if God is dead, we have no rational, objective standard for our ethics. Science can't tell us how we should live, precisely because it has no comment on the moral order. And in fact, if our only creed is secular humanism, that is that we, the people of the world, can make the world a better place, then to be perfectly honest, we really are without hope. Take the supreme challenge to life on planet Earth in the 21st century, global warming, and look, whatever you think of the science, even when the nations of the world agree that it's a problem, they disagree on what to do about it. Because at the end of the day, self-interest always prevails. Now, I'm the first to admit that wishing there is a God doesn't mean that there is a God. But at the same time, wishing that there is a God doesn't mean that God is dead either. The simple fact is that though the percentage might be decreasing, the overwhelming majority of human beings, both historically and globally today, have thought that God is alive and well. Again, I realise this doesn't prove that God is alive, and you shouldn't assume that God is not dead simply because other people believe it to be true, but that so many people believe that God is alive surely counts for something. I think it counts at least for careful investigation. Finally, I'm the one who mentioned ISIS and the crisis in Iraq, and I realise that intolerance between religions is hardly the best advertisement for God. Mind you, I'm pretty sure that getting rid of religion won't get rid of war or hostility or injustice either. Again, think Hitler or Pol Pot or Communist China. But I want to finish by my opening speech by saying that Christians are so certain that Jesus Christ is God, as proven by his resurrection from the dead 2,000 years ago, that for 2,000 years, Christians have sacrificed their life to share that belief with others. Do you hear what I said? I didn't say they've sacrificed other people's lives. They've sacrificed their own in peaceful proclamation, believing that they were following their master who sacrificed his life without ever harming another person. And again, I realise that doesn't prove that God is alive, but at least makes the claims worthy of your investigation. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoffrey, and now welcome Scott to the microphone for the second time.
Thank you. Now, there was a lot in that opening argument from Geoff. A lot of it sounded right to someone who doesn't have a full understanding of just what science can do for us. I'll start off with his issue of ethics, that science cannot tell us how we ought to live. If we take that statement just as it is, he's correct. But science can actually inform us to what our actions are going to do. What the result of our actions is going to be. The careful study through the scientific method can help us live a better life for every single one of us. Through the study of the results of our actions throughout history and in the lab, it can help us determine how we can live a better life. there was a brief moment we hinted at the turmoil that the world faces at the moment. However, every single one of us thinks that we're living in the worst time that has ever existed. That things are becoming more chaotic, that society is crumbling, that the youth of today have no respect for the elder generations. Totally incorrect. Every single study of societies throughout history demonstrate conclusively that we are living currently in a time of less crime, less war, less famine, less poverty. Every single measurement on the well-being of a society shows that it is decreasing constantly. Why is that? It's down to two things: education and education of women. Those two things combined help society better itself. Having people able to think for themselves without having to rely upon anyone else to tell them what to do, when to do it, or why it should be done, makes for a better society. The last point that I'll touch on from Geoff's opening argument is the idea of punishment. That if there is no God, then the people in ISIS, people like Hitler, people like Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, will go unpunished. Unfortunately, that might be the case. But because that's the case, we should be working using everything at our disposal right now to ensure that they come to a punishment in this life, before they die, before they think they've gotten away with it. We should be preventing horrible genocides that have occurred in the past. We should be putting aside our differences and preventing ISIS from murdering Christians like it's doing at the moment, just because they hold a different philosophical belief. We should be actively preventing governments from murdering people who have no religious belief. We should be doing all of that. We should be actively preventing people from using their own personal philosophical beliefs to continue bigotry in the workplace, in the education environment, and in society in general. I'm sure many of you would know of examples of a person who has experienced bigotry in this country alone. Many of it has been perpetrated by extreme religious people. I'm not talking about people that have a belief in a God and are well-meaning and, I'm trying to think of a polite word, well-meaning and functional members of society. You've got the examples of the Westboro Baptist Church in America. You've got the Catch the Fire ministries here in Australia. You've got the Rundle Mall Street preachers. Those people are the people that need to be challenged, and they need to be challenged by people that share the same belief in a God. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. I now invite Geoffrey back to the microphone.
Thanks, Scott. For the record, I hope that I fit in the category of functional member of society. Thank you. I guess I thought I'd pick up on three particular things that Scott's raised so far and offer some reflections on that. The first is to start with some of the comments about injustice and the sense that people get away with things in this world and they ought not be allowed to do so. let me say unequivocally, I could not agree more. I think it's incumbent on us actually to ensure that injustice is stamped out and that intolerance is dealt with, and that people who seem to get away with things, they ought to be held to account. Part of the reason I say that actually is because I think that when Jesus speaks so often of loving your neighbour and even your enemy, he has that exact idea in mind. That is that people ought not be allowed to get away with the things that so often we feel dismay and shame over when they do. So I do agree entirely that we ought to be doing everything we can. The reason why I started my first address, though, by saying that I hope that there is a God and that he is alive and well and real, is because my observation is that very often we're not very good at enforcing justice, in holding people to account. And, I could stand here and chronicle all the miscarriages of justice, all the times in which people do appear to have gotten away with things in this life. But in a sense, I don't need to, because you know them of yourself, from your own experience, from reading the paper, from hearing of others. Therefore, the reason why I've tried to frame my response in this way is to say that, yes, aim for those things, but if that's all that we have, then let's do our best. But that's a pretty bleak and a pretty despairing way, I think, of looking at life and what the meaning and value is of life. Which brings me to the second comment. Thank you to Scott for his observations about what I said about science and so on, and what it can do for us in terms of informing us about ethics and how we ought to live. I think Scott is right at one level. We are living in a time where we are reaping the benefits of scientific advance, and we are very fortunate for that. We are beneficiaries of that. I do have a slight nervousness in saying that, because I realise that for us to say that here in the privileged positions that we are in might not necessarily be echoed by those who live in other parts of the world for whom their experience is not nearly as fortunate as ours. But nevertheless, my big concern once again, and why I said that I hope that there is a God, is that ultimately I do wonder how much of a difference we will make. It's a bit, at one level topical and appropriate and nevertheless controversial to talk about climate change and global warming. Myself, I'm undecided as to whether or not it's actually real, so there you go, I'll put it out there. But my observation was simply that even when the so-called leaders of our world agree that it's a problem, if they can't agree on what to do about it, such that their own self-interest stops them, it seems to me that no matter how good we are at diagnosing the problem, the real difficulty is our will and our desire to do something about it. And again, without being a naysaying prophet of doom, I do wonder what it is that it will take for the nations of the world to agree to put their differences aside in pursuit of a common goal, even when that means that individual nations have to decide. Let me come back and say one final thing, and that's to do with the way in which Scott very helpfully opened his first address. He pointed out to us that God is a very nebulous term, and he's right. And I do appreciate even his willingness to debate when, as he's stated from up front, that he doesn't actually believe there is a God. So at one level we have put him in an unfortunate position of trying to defend a position that he doesn't believe in. So that's fair enough, but thank you for your willingness to be here. Which definition of God would be correct? How would you know? Those are right questions for Scott to pose for each one of us. Can all be correct? No. Can all be wrong? Possibly. I think the real question is, how would you find out? Now, what would be sufficient evidence for you to convince you that God is alive, that he is real, and that he deserves some place in your life? This is a Christian group that's hosting this event, and unashamedly, this group believes that in a man, Jesus Christ, we see what God is like. Very literally, we see God alive, and Christians understand that he died and rose again, and so therefore we see him dead and alive again. But therefore, if that's what Christians believe, I think the central thing for people to assess is, what do you think of this person? Do you think that what he said is credible? Do you think that what he did was believable? And part of the way I think in which you assess that is you look at the consequences of what he did and taught.
Scott back to make his concluding remarks.
I'd like to finish off by thanking... You're all right? Awesome. I'd like to thank the ES for organising today and such a large turnout, because this is, surprisingly, a very important question to a lot of people. Is there a God? And the evidence for a God. And so many people will actually hedge their bets and say, well, I don't know, I can't prove it, but there might be. Or they'll say, I don't know, I can't prove it, there might be, so I believe in it. And so many people don't have a strong conviction one way or the other. And they're actually the people that fill in that large majority of no religion on the census in Australia. And a large majority, again, still just tick the box next to the religion that their parents have. So the number of people that don't have a strong conviction one way or the other is probably around the 60 to 70% mark, which is probably quite surprising to some of you in the room. I'm just going to finish up a couple of comments from what Geoff just said. Who makes a difference in this world? Who makes a difference in this world? The only thing that has ever made a difference in this world is committed individuals, committed human beings. It hasn't been their God that has made the difference. It hasn't been their Messiah, their prophet. It has been the individual themselves that has made the difference. Whether they're religious, non-religious, or in between. It's an individual human being in small groups or on their own that have made a difference. That's the case with the person of Jesus Christ. He more than likely did exist. He more than likely did say the things that he said. That's recorded in the Bible. But he was an individual human being. After the fact, people have attributed all the miracles, the coming back from the dead, all of which require extraordinary evidence. These are extraordinary claims and require extraordinary evidence to prove as true. That doesn't dismiss what he said. Some of what he said is fantastic. Some of what he said was really horrible. Look it up. And so, lastly, these debates, what I like to call them, three speech set-piece debates, don't really introduce anything new into the argument. They're not conducive to exploring beliefs. There's no nuance to it. I can only present you some facts, and all of these facts are readily available to you if you go away and search for them yourself and think about it. However, the conclusions that you draw from what you've heard today is going to be coloured by the way you were brought up by your parents, by the education that you received and the educators who gave you that education. And it's going to be coloured by the values that you, as an individual, have come to hold as integral to your sense of self today. And those values are going to change throughout your life. My values have changed over the last couple of years. I used to strongly identify myself as an atheist. It was an in-your-face term. However, come to today, and I'm more likely to answer your question as, what do you identify as a humanist? My values and beliefs have drifted. Yours will too throughout your entire life. So you need to keep coming back to these fundamental questions of why are we here? Is there a reason we're here? Or do I make up my own reason? And do I live the best life that I can and make the world a better place for myself and everyone around me and everyone that I care for and everyone that I might ever meet in my life? Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Scott. And now I invite Jeffrey up to make his concluding remarks.
Thanks a lot, Scott. I guess I want to echo one of the things that Scott said just then, which is that the purpose of today, of course, is just to give you a chance to talk, and particularly to talk with your friends and classmates, especially if they're an ESO who's invited you here today. I'll come back and say something about that in just a moment. I appreciate the way in which Scott pointed out to us that some of the things about Jesus were quite extraordinary, that he's a person of history, that he said some amazing things. You want to question the evidence for the so-called miraculous things that he did, and that's a right thing for every person to do. It does seem to me, though, that if you, whatever you think of Jesus, there's a pretty compelling case to listen and to check out what it is that he did actually talk about. Whether or not you believe in him or what he claimed to do, actually. Let me show you why. If Jesus is dead, and is, as I guess many people think, he was just a person who lived for a while, did some stuff, made his mark on the world as an individual, but then passed and is only remembered now as someone of history. If he is dead, it does seem to me that if you choose to live by his teachings, so the things that Jesus taught were things like put others' wishes before your own, be generous and kind, help the poor and needy, love your neighbour, love your enemies even, as I said before. It seems to me that if you choose to live by that creed, you'd be a better than average member of the human race. And, I reckon all of us would like to meet you. On the other hand, if Jesus actually is alive, and this belief that Christians have that he didn't just live and die, but lived, died and rose again to life, then I think if you live by his teachings, you'd be glad to meet him at some point, because I think if you were to meet him, if he's alive, then all that you have lived for in hope will have been accomplished and fulfilled. Either way, one of the things that I hope you take from today is that it's important to actually check out what Jesus said and claimed to do. It's been really helpful for Scott to point out that, in a sense, high level of education and prosperity leads to decreasing religiosity, and certainly I think that's true in some places, but not always, I think. Partly, I think, that's because if you follow that conclusion to its logical end, you would conclude that no intelligent person is religious. No well-educated person is religious, and in fact, all that we need is for us to throw off the oppressive upbringing of our parents and our school teachers who taught us something until we reach a higher state of enlightenment. And I just think evidentially that's not true. There are many, many highly intelligent people who are religious. Which I think therefore points us to the fact that education is great for helping you to learn more, not to actually necessarily close down what it is that you once understood. Different way of putting that, and I guess this is the place in which I'd like to finish, is by speaking to you today if you're someone who's come here at the invitation of an ES member, of a Christian person. Scott's reminded us that as you grow older, your values change, which I think is really a gracious and a humble way of saying that we don't know everything when we're young, and hopefully we learn a little more as we get older. If you're here as someone who's not a Christian person, what I'd love to say to you is that if you think that Jesus is dead and that he's not God, I'd actually like to encourage you to talk to your Christian friend about that. Because your Christian friend who's invited you believes that Jesus is alive, and that because of that they've chosen to live their life in a particular way. One of the most interesting things about the Bible is that one of Jesus' early followers says at one point that if Christians believe that Jesus is alive when in fact he's not, in fact Christians are to be pitied because they have given their life for a lie. And I I guess where I'd like to finish then is to say, if that's your conviction, and if that's the discovery that you make, please don't just kind of let that pass with your friend who has dedicated or committed their entire life to a particular lifestyle and a particular belief system. I'm kind of sort of setting them up at this point, but go for it. Like, try and convince them that they are wrong. I think that's actually the essence of friendship, isn't it? That is, you speak honestly about truthful things, do it lovingly, of course, but you speak honestly and truthfully about important matters, and you don't just let them pass to one side. Thanks very much for your time.
Well, that concludes the formal part of the debate, and we'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming along to be a part of the event today. We'd particularly like to thank each of the speakers. Thank you, Geoff, and thank you, Scott. If you'd like to come forward and accept this token of our gratitude, give him a round of applause. If you've been challenged by what's been said today and have some questions that you'd like to ask, we encourage you to hang around. After a break of about 10 minutes, during which we invite you to some of the snacks that are going to be passed around, we're going to have a question and answer session with Geoff. If you're unable to stay, or even if you are, we encourage you also to consider coming along to the other ES talks that are hosted over the course of this week. Tomorrow, what does your God say about beer and sex? Wednesday, is your God just an imaginary friend? Thursday, is your God the only one? And finally on Friday, can your God make you immortal? These talks will be happening daily here in the Union Cinema at 1 p.m. Alternatively, the talks will be available online. If you want to hear more about what's going on this week, chat to one of the people in the blue jumpers. Well-known author C.S. Lewis said of Christianity that if false is of no importance, if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. To that end, I encourage you to make the most of this opportunity to think and talk through your issues with Jesus with the person that brought you, if you came with someone, or again with any of the students in the blue jumpers. Thank you again for your attention, and we'll resume again in 10 minutes.